Alright, well, it is officially November 1st, guys, so you're probably thinking, spooky season's over, right? Wrong. Obviously, it's spooky season every day on this channel, except for today, though, ironically enough. And by that, I mean, I may have just watched one of the least scary and most boring slashers I've ever seen. Not only in recent memory, but probably ever. This close to not making a video about this movie because it just felt so pointless, but I didn't suffer through this one for nothing, and I'm gonna make sure no one else does. Before we get into it, if you're new here, please consider hitting the subscribe button. We are in the home stretch for reaching monetization, so any form of support is greatly appreciated. All right, with that being said, let's dive into oh, whoops, my bad, that's the good version of this movie. Sorry, let's dive into Time Cut. Time Cut just came out this past October 30th on Netflix. It's one of those movies that feels like it could have been a lot more. With a premise that mixes time travel and slasher horror, the movie had all the ingredients to be something fresh and exciting. I went in ready to see a unique blend of suspense, nostalgia, horror, humor, just like Totally Killer excelled in last October, but what I got was more like a watered down version of that film. It's frustrating because you can see moments where the film could have made you care or do something entertaining, but instead, it just goes through the motions. First, we're gonna get into my non-spoiler portion of my review, and then we're gonna get into some spoilers afterwards. I'll give you a spoiler alert whenever that's gonna happen, obviously, like I usually do. Not that I think that you should see this movie or hold out and wait to be surprised. They're not worth it. Just don't do it. Anyways, non-spoiler portion first. Let's start with the basics. Time Cut centers on Lucy, played by Madison Bailey, a high school student living in 2024 who's haunted by the murder of her older sister, Summer, played by Antonia Gentry, known for Ginny in Georgia. Lucy was born after the killing spree of the Sweetly slasher, but her entire life has been shaped by her sister's tragic end and the effect it had on her family in town. When she finds a mysterious machine in an old barn during one of her family's annual visits to Summer's memorial, she's transported back to 2003, right to the night that the Sweetly slasher went on a killing spree. God, I hate this one killer's name. So right off the bat, the movie suffers from a lack of tension. For a horror movie with a time travel twist, the film doesn't seem too invested in that. You get the usual beats. Lucy stumbles upon the time machine, literally stumbles upon it randomly after a flash of light draws her attention to it, which just so happens to also be in the spot that her sister was murdered in back in 2003. She's confused, I think. I don't know. The lead actress did the best she could, but it's pretty stiff emotions from her across the board. I can't tell if that was her choice or if it was just the way that the writing came off. I don't know. But anyways, the problem with the time travel element is that instead of leaning into the chaos and suspense that a time traveling slasher should have, and has done before, this one skims over a lot of the stakes and setups with clunky exposition, lazy nostalgia, and a lack of focus. The slasher elements here are weak, to say the least. The film's PG-13. Now, I have a whole video on why PG-13 movies and the horror genre are often unfairly treated. If you've seen the video, you know, I love Tarot, one of my favorite PG-13 horror movies. This one here was a different story. The deaths were so boring. Happy Death Day is an example of how to cleverly craft deaths or blood in a PG-13 slasher. That, and they have the lovely Jessica Roth. This film fails miserably. The killer sucks too. Just almost like a carbon copy of the killer in Totally Killer. There's no memorable mask, weapon, or even a method of stalking his victims that stands out. He just kind of appears and disappears. Very, very little screen time too. Just is such a long stretch in between these deaths, because there's only like a few deaths in this movie. There's not much that goes on here. The filmmakers were definitely afraid to go all in on the horror elements. Death scenes are the worst kind of PG-13 kills, all sanitized, off screen, and lack any real impact. There's a moment where a character gets killed with a garden tool, or one gets killed with a DVD disc. That one was a bit on the nose. Like, I get it, it's the 2000s, people still use CD discs, I guess, for murder too. It's glossed over so quickly that you don't really feel much of anything for these characters. That, and you already know who's gonna die, given that the future has already explained the murders. Then the movie tries to lean on early 2000s nostalgia, but that just falls so flat. You get references through clothes, the low-rise jeans, the crop tops, which, by the way, would have never been allowed in my high school. And then you got a few era-specific songs by like Hilary Duff, Nelly Furtado, Avril Lavigne. And like I said, those casual nods to 2000s fashion, but it all just feels so surface level. It's as if someone just Googled 2000s trends and then threw them into a scene without considering how to make it feel authentic or meaningful. Like, and I hate to compare this, it's inevitable, it's gonna happen. The way that Kiernan Shipka's character in Totally Killer experienced the 80s, like for the first like day or so that she's stuck there, is so much funnier.
Excuse me, what year is it?
1987.
Oh my God.
I know. The 80s are almost over and I haven't even tried Coke yet. I don't know.
and is written in such a better way that it's really enjoyable and fun to watch. And also 2003 just doesn't really feel that long ago to poke fun at, yet. Then, what's even more frustrating is that buried in all of this is a genuinely interesting concept about family trauma and identity. Yeah, I know, the most interesting thing about this slasher movie is the family trauma and the whole identity crisis that Lucy goes through. It's a real fun time. Lucy's journey is more than just trying to save her sister. It's about figuring out who she is in the shadow of a tragedy that's defined her entire life, despite not even being alive for it. When she meets her family in 2003, she realizes they're completely different people. Her parents are happy, supportive, and full of life in a way that she's never known. This was all really good stuff, and yet it just doesn't really fit into this type of movie. It felt very out of place and severely cut into any time that could have been used for the killer, deaths, or anything a slasher movie fan would, want, while also not having enough substance to it, if that makes sense. The family trauma and identity crisis Lucy has could have been an emotional core that gave weight to the story, but instead it's just lightly touched on, never fully explored, and yet somehow takes up most of the film's runtime, and the slasher elements weren't heavy enough to balance out what could have been an emotional core and emotional stakes. No one felt like they were in any real danger after a certain point. This emotional aspect of the film could have, added something to it had the stakes been a bit higher, but thus that's not how it turned out. All right, now that's pretty much all I have to say spoiler-free wise, but please trust me, you do not want to watch this movie. I promise you, it's more boring than it sounds. Anyways, let's dig into some spoilers. This is your spoiler warning now. Let's get this over with so I can forget about this garbage-ass movie. So, when Lucy travels back to 2003, she obviously encounters Summer and her friend Quinn, who she's able to convince first that she's from the future. By the way, really quick, I forgot to put this in my script, so I'm just kind of winging it right now. But I did forget to mention, I cannot stand the way that they handle her proving that she's from the future. She proves to Quinn in the very beginning of the movie that she's from the future because she straight up just gives him her fucking iPhone. She's like, hey, future. That settles it. Like, I mean, how can you refute that? Then whenever it's time to convince Summer that she's from the future, no mention of her phone. She doesn't have it on her and doesn't even try. She uses a letter that could have been like faked or whatever. Just the way that it's handled is so lazy. It's so obvious that they didn't want to quickly reveal in the same way that she's from the future, like, hey, here's a phone. It was just done in such a way that felt extremely contrived. Like, just show her the damn phone. Where the hell is your phone? There's just no mention of her phone again, and it's just kind of like, what the Anyways, let me get back on track, otherwise I'll be here all day. The setup for these kills is one of the biggest disappointments because Summer's friends Val and Brian are attacked and killed at the mall. There's no drawn out suspense or clever buildup, just really quick, forgettable kills that don't live up to the potential horror of a slasher movie. Just an off-screen broken disc stab for Brian and a mini chase and off-screen face impalement to an escalator for Val. And that would have been it had Lucy not changed the past and got a security guard who wasn't even supposed to be down there killed while trying to save Val. Brief off-screen stab and that's it. And also, unless we're counting the killer who also has a very lackluster off-screen death, this is the only time we see the killer murder characters. That's it. Now, moving on to the other pieces of the film that also just didn't work. You have Lucy's first few encounters with her sister Summer. This is where you'd expect some tension or any kind of strong emotion considering Lucy knows her sister's fate and has the chance to save her, but the film never dives deep enough into that emotional conflict. Instead, we get a few heartfelt conversations between them, but nothing that really tugs at the heartstrings or makes us feel the weight of the decision that Lucy has to make. Does she save Summer and risk erasing herself from existence, or does she let things play out to preserve her life? It's a heavy question, but the film treats it as just another plot point rather than a crucial emotional dilemma. It's very rushed and her choices are decided on a whim, like after having her mind set on not saving her sister because she wants to live, she decides to save her after all. Like, okay, I get it, I'm not a robot. They got closer and they got to know each other, but the movie itself doesn't do anything to show that to the audience in a meaningful way. Even whenever she finally reveals to Summer that she dies and is one of the victims of the murder spree, it doesn't show us the moment that she reveals it to her. It cuts to immediately after. Not sure why they did it that way. The only explanation I can think of is that maybe neither of the actresses were able to convey that amount of emotion with that kind of conversation, so they just briefly skipped ahead and it was very soulless. Oh, and her sister's gay, and that's like a thing which is introduced midway or more through the movie. Yeah, the little interactions with Emmy are somewhat there as hints, but it just feels like it comes out of left field and was forced in to have diversity and mislead audiences, since we're supposed to believe this ominous note is from Ethan Quinn, but it's actually Emmy. Real clever switch there, guys. The final showdown with the Sweetly slasher feels rushed and anticlimactic. There's a scene in a rundown barn where Summer tries to outsmart the killer while Lucy and Quinn manage to sneak into this high security tech company place. Oh, and one thing that I forgot to mention initially during the video is that Lucy and Summer's dad works at this tech company plant or whatever that they're sneaking into. It's to replace this battery or electricity, something that powers the time machine that somehow existed in 2003 and 2024. I don't know. It was stupid, and that's probably why I forgot to mention it, but figured it should still be mentioned nonetheless for some context. But yeah, there you have it. Another plot convenience. They managed to not only not get caught, but they managed to make it just in time to save Summer and give us the worst killer reveal ever. It's revealed to be Quinn, the dude that's been helping Lucy and is secretly in love with Summer, which obviously, you know, I just told you so you know how that turns out. But anyways, you would think that this would be the moment where everything goes full throttle, but again, the filmmakers were afraid to go too dark. There's minimal blood, no real sense of danger, and the whole reveal feels so undeserved, confusing, and lazy. It feels like the film is sprinting to the end, but without giving us the satisfying climax, tension, or explanations we're hoping for. Summer escapes evil Quinn with Lucy and Summer. It's then revealed in a cheap, rushed way that Lucy actually did end up causing a ripple early on in the film by preventing Ethan and Brian from dumping Quinn in the lake, which is revealed to have been the motive for OG Quinn. Whenever Lucy prevented it from happening, she altered the space-time continuum, or whatever. Look, I don't know, I'm fighting for my life here with this time travel shit. Anyways, she somehow caused another version of him to be evil in a different timeline, resulting in him coming from the future to kill everybody so he could get away with it by being in a different decade. Whatever, I guess that's how that works. News to me, Lucy drags his ass to the present in some random parking garage and gives a measly electric shock, I think, and then like a very weak off-screen stab. It was shot like shit, and the climax was ass. Anyways, like I said, Lucy changed her mind on living since she found out in the past that her parents never wanted another kid, so she risks losing her existence to save Summer. However, that doesn't happen. So many plot holes, but since Lucy managed to save Summer and still exist, not sure how, this results in Lucy choosing to stay with the parents and Summer in 2003, since I guess everyone was just cool with that. Obviously, they don't know who Lucy is in the present. She mentions that later on in the ending. She says that she goes by her parents' house and nobody knows who she is, so I feel like she kind of has to go back to 2003, but it does not make sense how she is still alive. This movie didn't seem to think that they needed to give us an explanation, so we're just gonna roll with it. And by the time the movie ends, you're left wondering if there was like a whole chunk of the movie that got left on the cutting room floor. Everything just wraps up in a cute little bow despite all the ripples and paradoxes that should have been caused beyond the whole lake thing. Nope, just living together as sisters with their parents, just cool with all of this. Oh, and Summer gets to have Emmy since she didn't die. Lucy has a family she loves, her sister, and a boyfriend who, you know, in a different timeline was a total psychopath. You do you, girl. But what really bothers me though is how Time Cut could have been something much better if it had just committed to its ideas and the slasher elements. This movie was on Netflix. How the f did you not shoot for an R rating? Like, what? Instead, we get a time travel, melodramatic plot that's glossed over with very, very, very little slasher elements and some pseudoscientific bullshit about paradoxes that never really come into play, or at least in a way that makes sense. Even the big questions about Lucy's identity and her relationship with her family are just skimmed over. And then, like I said, you got the little slasher elements, which could have been brutal and memorable, but are toned down to the point where they feel completely toothless. Huge disappointment for those that were expecting a slasher like Totally Killer or even like the Happy Death Days. All right, now before we wrap this up, I'll go ahead and give a quick mini list of pros and cons for this one, just to reiterate how much you should not watch this movie. Pros, there are moments where you get a glimpse of a deeper emotional story about family trauma. Madison Bailey delivers some solid scenes, especially when interacting with her alternate family. And the humor is okay, sometimes. All right, pros are done, now let's move on to the cons. The Sweetly Slasher is a weak villain with no real menace. I'm so sick of that name. The death scenes are bland, sanitized, and lack any impact. The 2000s nostalgia is shallow and doesn't add much. The ending feels rushed, leaving little room for any real closure or satisfaction. And the killer being Quinn, despite the paradoxes, half-assed explanations earlier and all the other shit, it just doesn't fit right, almost cheating. Like, they wanted him to be the killer, but also wanted a happy ending for him and Lucy, so just boom, second evil Quinn. And maybe the biggest con of all, despite coming first, feels like a complete and total ripoff of Totally Killer. At this rate, even if I made this damn movie, there's no way I'd have released it after Totally Killer came out. There's no comparison, if I'm being honest. Totally Killer wasn't a masterpiece, but it was a hell of a fun ride, and after watching Time Cut, sure as hell looks like a masterpiece now.
Oh my god! What? I forgot to bring vodka.
Bottom line, Time Cut is a frustrating watch because you can see what it could have been. It has the foundation for a unique horror experience, but ultimately was too afraid to take risks or commit to its own story, which is very disappointing since we've gotten great genre-bending slashers such as Totally Killer, which even though Time Cut technically came first, going as far back as 2021 when it was filmed, it was destined to fall victim to being compared with Totally Killer, and the same thing would have happened had Totally Killer come out after this. Then you have the other films that are even by the same team, such as Freaky and Happy Death Day 1 and 2, that handle the slasher elements and sci-fi aspects so much better. For fans of horror, slasher, or time travel genres, this movie is a missed opportunity. If you're in the mood for a genre-bending slasher, you have 3 great recommendations right here. Time Cut is a 2 out of 10 movie at best. The 2 stars are for the sheer effort it takes to make a film. That's it. Everything else was a failure. Skip this film and you'll thank me later. Alright guys, well, thank God that's over. My God, this movie sucked ass. Quick few messages here before I go. Like always, if you're new here and you liked what you saw, please hit the subscribe button. And if you really liked what you saw and you just want to go that extra mile, hit the notifications bell so you'll be notified whenever I post new videos. As always, thank you guys so much for your support. I couldn't do it without you. Don't watch this fucking movie. I love you all. Leave a like and share, and I'll see you in the next one.